Okay, welcome back to math class, and welcome to part 3 of 9-1, graphing quadratic functions. So far we've practiced graphing with the table. Then yesterday, we figured out all the pieces of the graph that we could find out using an equation. And today, we're going to use those pieces to graph from an equation without having to make a table, just guessing at the values. And I have 5 steps I'm going to give you for graphing purposes. Step 1, to graph a quadratic function. Step 1 is going to be find the axis of symmetry. Step 2, find the vertex and determine whether it's a maximum or minimum. Step 3, find the y-intercept. Step 4, find any symmetrical points you need. And step 5, connect the dots. Connect your points in a curve. Okay, so we're going to jump straight into drawing that and see what it looks like. I'm going to switch colors though, because that purple is fading fast. Okay, so I'm going to give us an example. It's going to look like this: negative 2x squared plus 2x minus 1. There's our equation. Now I need to graph this equation. So first things first is I'm going to draw my coordinate plane. Remember, this is our y-axis, this is our x-axis. Okay, step 1, just like I said over here, is find the axis of symmetry. You guys remember from yesterday that finding my axis of symmetry, to find it, all I have to do is go to where x equals negative 2 divided by AB. Alright, and that is when I switched all of those around. It's when negative b is divided by 2a. And we know that that's when negative b, so negative 2 divided by 2 times a, which is negative 2. So 2 times negative 2. Alright, so our axis of symmetry is when x equals negative 2 divided by negative 4, or 1/2. So I'm going to go on my graph over to where x equals 1/2. So if I count over one space, it's going to be the halfway mark. There's my axis of symmetry. Now what I know about my axis of symmetry is that it runs straight through my vertex of my graph. So that's going to be my x value of my vertex. So finding my vertex, I'm going to take my x value when x is 1/2. What is y? Right? So I'm going to plug that into my main equation. I'm going to write that here: negative 2 times 1/2 squared plus 2 times 1/2 minus 1. Okay, so 1/2 squared is 1/2 times 1/2, which is going to be 1/4. Negative 2 times 1/4 is going to give me negative 2/4, which is the same as negative 1/2, plus 2 times 1/2 is just going to give me 1 minus 1. Okay, now plus 1 minus 1 is going to cancel each other out, so my y value is going to be negative 1/2. So in other words, when x equals 1/2, my y equals negative 1/2. Alright, there's my vertex. Now I need to know before, as I'm plotting this, whether it's going to be a maximum or a minimum. Now you guys should remember from the last 2 lessons that the way I figure this out is by looking at my a value. Now my a here is negative 2, which means it's less than 1, which means I know that my graph is going to look like this when I graph it, and that my vertex is going to be a maximum. So I'm going to go ahead and plot that point, 1/2 and negative 1/2. So 1/2, let me put, and negative 1/2. There's my vertex, and I know that all of my other points should be coming down this way because I know that my graph's going to look like this. Alright, one easy way to figure out what's going to be the next point we should graph without having to just plug in random numbers to guess is by finding the y-intercept. Now our y-intercept, you remember, is just our c value. So our y-intercept here is negative 1. So I'm going to go to the y-axis and negative 1, and that's going to be my second point. Now step 4 says find symmetrical points. What this means is basically since we have our axis of symmetry, and I know that this point is here, I can find another point that's going to be in the same distance away from our axis of symmetry as this one. So this is 1/2 space away, so I'm going to go 1/2 in the other direction. So there's me a symmetrical point. I made it a little low. There's me a symmetrical point. Oh no, it's too close to the line. You guys get the idea though. Okay, now that I've got a symmetrical point, I have 3 points, which is enough to connect all my dots to make a parabola. So I'm going to go down like this and like this. And there it is, graphed in 5 relatively easy points. No matter what the graph is, you follow these steps, get your 3 points, and just connect them. Hopefully you got it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.